The HOA president thought she was destroying my life by tearing down my studio, but she accidentally unearthed a hidden cache of forbidden substances that exposed her organized scheme and earned her dozens of years behind bars. I've lived in Pinecrest Estates for exactly 3 years, and for 3 years I've been the only person on my street who doesn't get invited to the annual summer block party. My name is Marcus, and I'm a retired structural engineer. I spent 30 years designing bridges and heavy-duty infrastructure, ensuring that things built by human hands could withstand the test of time and nature. When I retired, I wanted 2 things: a quiet garden to grow my heirloom tomatoes, and a state-of-the-art workshop where I could restore vintage furniture. I thought I'd found paradise in this gated community, but I quickly realized that the pristine lawns and white picket fences were just a facade for something much uglier. The rot at the heart of Pinecrest had a name, and that name was Linda. Linda was the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman who treated her position like she was the high priestess of a small, suburban cult. From the week I moved in, she made it clear that I didn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood. It started with petty fines: $50 for my grass being a quarter-inch too long, $100 because my trash cans were visible from the street for 10 minutes after the collection truck left. Then the comments started. "We like to keep things traditional here, Marcus," she told me once, her eyes scanning my property with a cold, clinical disdain. "Some people just don't understand the standards we uphold." I ignored the bait. I paid the fines, kept my head down, and focused on my project. I had spent 6 months and nearly $60,000 building a custom, eco-friendly studio in my backyard. It was a masterpiece of engineering, soundproofed, solar-powered, and built with high-grade cedar that matched the natural surroundings. I had every permit required by the city. I had checked the HOA bylaws 3 times over. According to the rules, as long as the structure was not visible from the street and stayed under a certain height, it was perfectly legal. Last Tuesday, Linda marched up my driveway with 2 other board members in tow. She didn't knock, she just stood there until I came out. She pointed a manicured finger toward my backyard. "That structure," she spat, "has to go. It's an eyesore. It's bringing down the property values of the entire block." I calmly showed her the city permits and the section of the HOA handbook that I'd highlighted in yellow. I told her that I was well within my rights. Linda didn't even look at the papers. She just leaned in, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "I don't care what your papers say. You don't belong here, and neither does that shack. We're going to make sure you understand how things work in Pinecrest." I thought she was just blustering. I was wrong. 2 days later, I had to drive into the city for a follow-up appointment with my doctor. It was supposed to be a quick trip, but traffic was a nightmare. While I was sitting in my car, my phone started buzzing incessantly. It was my security system. I opened the app, and my heart dropped into my stomach. On the live feed from my backyard, I saw a heavy-duty demolition crew. They weren't just taking the studio apart, they were smashing it. A yellow excavator was swinging its bucket, crushing the cedar walls I'd carefully sanded by hand. And standing right there on my patio, holding a clipboard and a cup of coffee, was Linda. She was laughing, pointing at the wreckage, and chatting with the foreman like they were at a garden party. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made my vision blur. I threw my car into a U-turn, ignoring the honks of angry drivers, and raced back toward the suburbs. My mind was racing. That studio wasn't just a shed. It contained my expensive specialized tools, my late father's workbench, and several pieces of commissioned furniture I'd been working on for months. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the air was thick with the smell of splintered wood and dust. I leaped out of the car and ran toward the backyard, screaming for them to stop. The foreman looked at me, then at Linda. She didn't look worried at all. She actually stepped forward, a smug, triumphant smile plastered on her face. "Oh, Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We decided to take care of that little violation for you. Since you refused to comply, the board exercised its right to remediate the property at the owner's expense. You'll be receiving the bill for the demolition crew tomorrow." I looked past her at the heap of rubble that used to be $60,000 of my hard work and memories. But as I stared at the wreckage, I noticed something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. The crew hadn't just destroyed the studio. In their haste to remediate my property, they had dug deep into the earth, and the excavator's claw had hooked onto something heavy and metallic that was buried beneath the foundation, something that definitely wasn't part of my construction plans. Linda followed my gaze, and for the first time, the smug look on her face faltered. Her skin went pale, and she took a sharp step back as she realized that her organized scheme to drive me out had just unearthed a secret that was never supposed to see the light of day. The screech of metal against metal echoed through the neighborhood, a sound so violent it seemed to vibrate in my very teeth. The excavator's heavy claw had hooked onto the edge of a massive industrial-grade steel crate that had been buried nearly 6 feet under the foundation of my studio. It wasn't supposed to be there. I had done the soil samples myself before pouring the slab, but I hadn't gone that deep. Someone had buried this thing long before I bought the property, and they had done it with professional precision. "Stop! Stop the machine!" Linda screamed. Her voice, usually so controlled and condescending, was now thin and piercing with panic. The foreman, a rugged man who looked like he'd seen it all, climbed down from the cab, his face pale. "Ma'am, I can't just leave that. If I've hit a main line or a storage tank, we have a major environmental hazard on our hands." "I said stop!" Linda marched toward him, her face a mask of desperation. "Fill it back in. Now, I'll pay you double, triple. Just cover it up and get out of here." I stepped forward, my phone already out and recording. "No one is filling anything in," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "This is my property, Linda. You just forced a demolition on a legal structure, and in the process, you've uncovered what looks like a massive, unregistered container. I've already called the police, and they're 5 minutes out." Linda turned to me, and for a split second, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of a neighborly dispute or an HOA lawsuit. It was the fear of someone whose life was about to end. "Marcus, please," she whispered, her hands shaking. "You don't know what you're doing. We can settle this. I'll pay for the studio. I'll pay for 10 studios. Just let them cover it back up." But it was too late. The weight of the crate, combined with the way the excavator had tilted it, caused the rusted hinges to groan and finally snap. The heavy lid fell forward with a dull thud, revealing the contents to the afternoon sun. I moved closer, the camera on my phone zooming in. Inside the crate were dozens of vacuum-sealed packages filled with a dense, gray-white substance, clearly forbidden substances, packed for long-term storage. Nestled beside them were several heavy-duty cases. One of them had burst open, spilling out stacks of high-denomination bills, and something even more chilling. Several pieces of unauthorized weaponry, disassembled and wrapped in oilcloth. The silence that followed was heavy. The construction workers backed away, their hands raised as if they were already being held at gunpoint. I realized then that Pinecrest Estates wasn't just a snobby neighborhood. It was a hub for an organized scheme, a distribution point hidden behind the veil of suburban perfection. And Linda wasn't just a bossy HOA president. She was the gatekeeper. "The Internal Security Service," the foreman muttered, looking at the packages. "This isn't just a local bust. This is a federal-level nightmare." Linda was frantically dialing a number on her phone, her back turned to us. "It's out," I heard her hiss into the receiver. "The engineer found the cache. You need to get here now. Bring the group. We need to secure the site before the authorities arrive." My blood ran cold. She wasn't calling a lawyer. She was calling the radicals who owned that crate. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder. I felt a momentary sense of relief, but that vanished when two black SUVs with dark-tinted windows roared around the corner, ignoring the speed bumps, and screeched to a halt, blocking the entrance to my driveway. 4 men stepped out. They weren't wearing uniforms, and they didn't look like police. They were dressed in tactical gear, and they were carrying illegal weapons openly. They didn't look at the construction crew or me. They looked straight at the crate. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his temple, looked at Linda. "You had one job, Linda. Keep the neighborhood quiet." "It's not my fault," she shrieked, pointing at me. "He wouldn't stop. He built that studio right on top of the drop zone." The man with the scar turned his gaze toward me. It was the look of a predator deciding whether a kill was worth the effort. He raised his weapon, the barrel pointing directly at my chest. At that exact moment, 3 police cruisers swerved onto the street, their lights flashing blue and red. The officers leaped out, drawing their service weapons, screaming for everyone to drop their arms. We were caught in a 3-way standoff. The corrupt HOA board, a group of dangerous radicals protecting their organized scheme, and the local police who had no idea they were walking into a war zone. "Drop the weapon," one of the officers shouted. The man with the scar didn't flinch. He looked at the police, then back at me, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You wanted to see how things work in Pine Crest, Marcus," he said, his voice barely audible over the sirens. "Well, you're about to get a front-row seat to the end of your life." He didn't drop the weapon. Instead, he reached into his vest and pulled out a small black remote. "If I can't have the shipment," he growled, "nobody gets the evidence." He thumbed the button, and a high-pitched electronic beep emitted from somewhere deep inside the crate. My eyes widened as I realized the organized scheme had a failsafe. I dived behind the ruins of my studio just as the world turned into a deafening roar of fire and light. The heat from the blast was a physical wall, pushing against me even as I huddled behind the thick cedar beams of my ruined studio. It wasn't a conventional explosion. It was an incendiary device, a high-temperature thermite charge designed to melt the forbidden substances and illegal weapons into an unrecognizable slag. For a few seconds, the backyard was a roaring furnace of white light and choking chemical smoke. But as an engineer, I knew something the radicals didn't. When they'd used that excavator to rip the crate out, they'd inadvertently severed the main drainage line for the entire block. Thousands of gallons of water had been gushing into the pit for the last 10 minutes, pooling around the base of the steel container. When the device ignited, the sudden contact between the intense heat and the flood of water created a massive steam explosion. Instead of incinerating the evidence, the crate was violently buckled and hurled upward, scattering packets with substance and bundles of cash across my lawn like morbid confetti. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the shouting escalate. The radicals in the SUVs tried to scramble for their illegal weapons, but they were pinned down by the local police who had moved with surprising speed. Within seconds, the air was filled with the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a helicopter. This wasn't just a local patrol anymore. A fleet of black vans screeched into the cul-de-sac, marked with the insignia of the Internal Security Service. They had been conducting an internal check on this specific organized scheme for months, and Linda's ego-driven demolition had just handed them the smoking gun they needed. I watched from the ground as the man with the scar tried to make a break for his SUV. He didn't get 5 feet. A flashbang detonated near his feet, and a tactical team from the Internal Security Service swarmed him, pinning him to the pavement. Linda was standing near her porch, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of horror. She tried to retreat into her house, but 2 officers intercepted her. "I'm the president of the HOA," she shrieked as they forced her hands behind her back. "You can't do this. I have rights. That man is a liar. He planted all of this." One of the agents, a stern woman in a tactical vest, walked over to her. She held up a clear evidence bag containing the heavy-duty encrypted phone Linda had been using. "We've been monitoring your organized scheme since the spring, Linda. We were just waiting for you to lead us to the central cache. Thank you for digging it up for us." The transition from neighborhood queen to federal prisoner was instantaneous. As Linda was led away in handcuffs, her eyes met mine. There was no smugness left, only a hollow, pathetic desperation. She realized that by trying to remediate me, she had dismantled the very criminal empire that funded her lavish lifestyle. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was catastrophic for the Pinecrest HOA. It turned out the entire board was part of the organized scheme, using the HOA fees to launder money and the neighborhood's private status to move forbidden substances through the city. Every single one of them was slapped with heavy charges. The local prosecutor made it clear they were looking at huge terms in federal prison, tens of years, with no hope of early release. I didn't just sit back and watch. I hired the most aggressive civil litigation attorney in the state. I sued the HOA, the individual board members, and the demolition company. Since the Internal Security Service had seized all their criminal assets, I was first in line for restitution. I was awarded a settlement that didn't just cover the cost of my studio. It was enough to buy half the houses on the street. I stayed in Pinecrest, mostly out of spite. I rebuilt my studio, but this time I built it even bigger, with a reinforced concrete foundation and a rooftop garden that overlooked the entire neighborhood. The new HOA board, mostly terrified neighbors who had no idea what was happening, now clears every single one of my requests within 24 hours. Now, when I sit on my patio at night, I look over at Linda's old house. It's been seized by the government, the windows boarded up and the lawn turning brown. I think about her sitting in a cramped cell, wearing a jumpsuit that definitely doesn't fit the aesthetic she loved so much. I take a sip of my coffee and smile. Sometimes the internal check comes for everyone, and in the end the only thing that truly lasts is a foundation built on the truth.